It is the Patrick Hoban.
How's it going? Good to talk to you.
It's been so long, dude.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so we need to give this man the intro he deserves here. This is Patrick Hoban, the originator of all these Zoomers who run around throwing these terms out like extender and starter without really knowing where the origin came from. And it's this man here, at least, who popularized it in Yu-Gi-Oh! You are perhaps one of the forefathers of modern deck building in a sense. Patrick
Thank you.
Hoban
I appreciate
has
that.
Yeah, Patrick Hoban has infinite amount of tops, couple of YCS wins as well, or some event wins at least, decent amount. Very popularized as well with the ARG, and he even wrote his own book, that being Road of the King.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on here. I just wanted to catch up, and for anyone who does remember Patrick Hoban and who remembers where this man has been, where did you step out of the game from? Like when did the the retirement occur?
So I went to work on the Hillary campaign in 2016, and so I stopped playing like the summer there for about 6 months through the end of the campaign. Then I played a little bit after that through the beginning of like 2017, and then I kind of stepped away at the beginning of 2017.
2017 would be just around about the start of Zoo, I believe, right?
Okay, I'm wrong then. So 2018, because I played Zoo.
2018. Oh, okay, right. Oh yeah, I do recall you playing a bit of Zoo. So I don't know if this is just like a life thing or was it like Yu-Gi-Oh related? Because back in your absolute peak of like 2014, early 2015, you were like one of the biggest driving force behind modern deck building, and you were like the go-to guy for any sort of like competitive knowledge and information. People would grasp at anything you said back in the day. So when you decided to step away, like, was this just because like you didn't want to play anymore, or was it just like life was you're growing up and committing more to actual personal matters more?
Yeah, sure. So, a couple things here is on one side, it just felt a little bit repetitive at a certain point. The format seemed like very similar. So I guess in a sense, I got a little bit bored. But then I think this was around the time I was starting to think about starting my company. And then I started to, think about making it more than an idea at that point. And then I really started to focus on that.
What is it you do exactly for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah, sure. So we have a startup, and so it's a data enrichment startup. We've pivoted since the pandemic, and it helps nonprofits raise money for charity. It lets them find donors or find volunteers or find community partners that they want to, and then get their contact information so that they can reach out to them for either fundraising, volunteer or partnership purposes.
How's that been going?
It's going well. So we just hired 2 full-time people. So that's exciting. Both developers, really smart guys. And yeah, it's going well.
It's good to see that, you're doing something that, I guess like was your vision and stuff and then made it
Thank
into
you.
reality.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
It's really because I remember reading your book and noticing that you seem to kind of sometimes like draw this comparison between real life and Yu-Gi-Oh, like quite significantly, like the amount of effort you're willing to put in and like the sort of like theory that you develop, it like it resonates into your personal life and makes you driven to do your own goals or whatever it may be alongside it, or I guess in your case instead of it. Do you think like Yu-Gi-Oh
Sure.
has influenced that a lot?
Yeah, totally. And, I think in the beginning, I was never like super interested in business, but I did end up reading a good bit of business books. I feel like more to get better at Yu-Gi-Oh than anything. So I think I ended up kind of getting interested into like startups and stuff like that. But I think really, at the end of the day, it's just problem solving, right? Like you're looking for like innovative ways to, do something 10 times better.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Well, talking a little bit a bit more about the game and stuff. How much
Yeah,
do
sure.
you know about where we
So
are at 2021?
yeah, so up until about a month ago, maybe, 5, 6 weeks at this point, nothing. Right. I've been totally removed from it. I didn't know what any of the real cards did. But then, you start to miss it, I think. And so I started learning the cards, and now I've been thinking about playing again, actually.
Have you what have you done? Like let us know. Like what have you been reading?
I
Like
went
what
to a
have you been?
local once.
Okay. Did you participate or just hang out or?
I did, but I was going to an event afterwards, so I dropped it to one
Oh, okay.
because
What deck
I
were
had
you
to leave
playing?
at the event. Dragons.
Modern Dragon Link.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
It was probably 2 weeks ago.
That's a huge like gap in time, I think, from when you last played. Because I mean, I remember quite famously your 2013 like Dragon Ruler, Mythic Ruler deck, right? Like,
Yeah,
and
sure.
they are not very similar at all. Like between then and now.
I think you're still like so the cards are probably a little bit more powerful. I think that's the general strategy from like a card design perspective. But I think the things that you look for are still very similar.
Okay, and what would
Like,
that
all right,
be?
so for example, I think a baseline good deck has like two good plays probably per turn, right? Like Tri Brigade. They can normal summon a Tri Brigade, they can special cross, right? And I think that two baseline lines of play per turn is kind of like standard, but kind of independent of format. Like if you could get to that third or fourth line of play in a deck, that's probably a good deck. And so I think that regardless of whether or not the cards change, I think those are the kinds of things that you're looking for.
So it's really interesting that your sort of philosophy behind picking like the best deck per se. It sounds to me it hasn't changed in years now, because that's kind of what you did previously, was like
I
essentially
feel
the
like I
deck.
know enough now that it doesn't feel like it's changed a ton.
Hmm.
And because I feel like there's still a lot of like gaps in the format where people could be doing a lot of things better. And there's plenty of things that there aren't. Like I think Drytron's an example where there's not, right? They're very restrictive in terms of like what you can special summon. So I think that, it's really powerful and does what it does. But I think that's probably the ceiling, right? Like you can't mix it with something else and make it do other things. Whereas I think there are other things in the format where you probably could.
I think that the biggest change that we saw, at least during now, when you're going to locals, and previously when you first was playing a lot previously, was Master Rule 4 and the link summoning
Yeah.
mechanic, which I guess you're more than aware of how it works now, so I don't need to drill you on that. But what, like, did you hear about it at the time, or is this like something you've learned recently?
Yeah,
And
I
what are your
actually
thoughts
played
on it?
with links. The last nationals I played in, it was right after that they came out with Zoo,
Mm.
with links, and I was still playing Zoo at the time. And I actually topped an event with links before I quit, so I knew what they did, but they were very like basic at the time. They were the equivalent of like Garnets Utopia for Exceeds at the time.
Yeah, so how do you feel about links, like, in that time frame? Like
I
they've
like them.
come a long way. Do you like
Yeah,
link summoning?
totally. Yeah, sure, totally. I think it's probably, since they've changed the rule back to where you can just use like exceeds or synchros or whatever, fusions, all that. I think it feels pretty similar in general. And links are really cool cards.
Yeah, okay. I mean, a lot of people would potentially have, at least my personal circle, a lot of my friends, for example, just simply stopped playing the game because there was this sort of like spike in power with Link's monsters, like things like Summon Sork and Gumblar and Firewall and all
I
these
wish I got
different.
to play those formats.
Yeah,
Honestly,
that definitely sounds like something up your alley.
so for me, I
That.
always felt like the game was the most fun when the cards were the best.
Mm, okay, interesting. Um, why is it that after so long, you've still never been the kind of person who's ever shied away from playing? Like, you've always, from what I understand, have always seemed to go for the decks that are higher ceiling and powerful, rather than something a little bit maybe more basic and consistent, like a Tri Brigade or whatever.
Yeah, I think that, to be honest, I think they're better. And just as a whole, like if I'm coming into, a tournament that's 16 rounds and I have to play the same deck for all 16 rounds, I think playing higher ceiling decks gives you a better chance. And I also don't know. I think that there's an idea of a trade-off between consistency and power. And in a lot of cases it is true, but I think often in the best decks it's not true. And you get both.
Okay. Do you think that there's been a change in deck building at all since 2013, 2014, or do you think that the principles and stuff have pretty much remained the same?
I think probably the biggest change is the emphasis on hand traps in the modern game. Because in the beginning, there was like maxi effect failure, stuff like that. I guess Dragon Ruler was like really the first deck that played a lot of hand traps, but then after that, even, it went back to maybe like 3 a deck or something. So it wasn't like a huge focus. People were still playing like more real traps. So I think that dynamic has been the biggest change. But at the end of the day, like they're very similar. Back then maybe you would diamond dyer to pop a back row before you make your real play. Now you do something to bait out ash before you make your real play. So it's still like a very similar concept. But I think that shift from, there was plenty of hand traps, but the emphasis is now more on hand traps. I feel like that's probably the biggest change I see.
And how do you feel about that? Do you like that? Do you dislike it?
I think it's probably necessary to an extent. Like the cards keep getting more powerful, and so like it's no secret that like traps are the worst of the 3 kinds of cards in the game, and so like I just don't think that regular traps can keep up. So I think it was kind of necessary as the cards got more powerful.
Wow, yeah. So it's strange because, modern deck building, well, not really deck building, but game design has, shifted because like you said, there's this like power creep. And so it's almost like a band-aid. But do you think that like, for a lot of people, that just meant that Yu-Gi-Oh has reached this sort of boiling point? And for a lot of people, they just kind of pieced out because it's like, oh, these cards are so powerful. Now we have to basically play traps from the hand. Do you see this as like a problem to solve? Or do you think like,
it's funny. I don't. So, not only do I like the formats where the cards are the best, I also think they tend to be the best formats. But it's funny because I've talked to some of the people from Konami's research and development, and the power creep is very intentional on their part. And it's in an effort to basically get people to not quit playing the game, because if you have a good deck and it's too powerful, you would think if you just ban it, then the players go buy new decks, and then Konami makes more. But what they told me was that wasn't actually what ends up happening, and that if they just like outright ban the best deck and make it unplayable, they can't. Then they stop playing, and they don't end up buying the next deck. And so what their approach is to create a slight power curve, so each set is a little bit more powerful than the last set. And by doing that, you get this like natural, people aren't forced out of playing their deck. They can kind of upgrade at their own pace, rather than making, Shaddoll and banning it. You just make cards that are better than Shaddoll cards, right? And then at some point they can switch from Shaddoll to whatever the new deck is, right? And so that's kind of the approach that they've taken. And I think if you look at event size, it's probably worked, I would say, for what they're going for. Of course, some people don't like it. Yeah, I think that Yu-Gi-Oh probably has 3 like eras. I'd say the beginning of the game through 2008 was the first era, where it was like very slow, goat control, chaos control, things like that. Then we got to this like medium point in Yu-Gi-Oh where I think, like Return Dag was probably the first deck, and then Teledad after it. You get some powerful things with like Rescue Cat going, and it's like the cards are good, but they're not great yet. And I think that period lasts from like 2008 to 2013, really. I think Windups is probably the last deck of that period, I would say. And then I think Dragon Rulers is probably the start of modern Yu-Gi-Oh, where the cards kind of get really good at that point. And so I think that when it comes to people's preferences, I think sometimes they prefer either that first or second era of Yu-Gi-Oh. But if you like this most recent era of Yu-Gi-Oh, which I do, then, it works for me.
It's interesting that you put an extra separation there, because I think, at least for me personally, I've always went from like, okay, old school Yu-Gi-Oh! X to 2013, new school Yu-Gi-Oh! 2013 onwards. But I guess, there is that sort of like in-between period.
Yeah, but the cards are okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you ever experience like the massive spike in power creep that we experienced in 2018?
I mean,
I know you
Dragon
didn't play
Rulers was
actively,
probably
but
the biggest one at the time. Like they were significantly better than any deck that had ever been, created at that point. Then they, kind of toned it back, and I would say that, even with power curve, they kind of had to resort to the bandit strategy because, it wasn't going to work, and they had to tone it back like that because, sometimes as a last resort. But I think that, even for a couple of years after that, the cards probably never got as good as they were in that first Dragon Ruler format. It was probably Necrons before they were better than that. Yeah. And then the power curve probably kept going after that, I think.
Okay. Do you think we'll be seeing more of you at events and stuff, or do you think it's more just kind of like a hobby at this stage? Because I feel like you're the kind of person who likes to go all in on something, right? You don't really half-ass anything.
Yeah, so I mean, I've thought about this a lot because I got to balance it, but so I won't play as much as I used to, but yeah, I mean, if I'm playing, I'd like to travel.
Have you been in tune with the recent Bandless at all on the upcoming set?
I saw it, yeah, sure. The upcoming set, maybe a little bit of it, not a
Hmm.
ton, but the main list, sure.
And what was your thoughts on it? The
Um,
Bandless, that is. Because I feel like, I don't know if you noticed, but Bandless back in like 2013, 14-ish, like they were a bit more severe than what we've had in
yeah.
recent times, like, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of that was they were making some corrections that they probably should have made earlier than that. You saw things like floodgates start to get limited that weren't even being played, and now you see cards that are totally banned that never really even got played, right? And so but I understand why they're banned, and they probably should be banned. But I think that in the earlier on, they probably had to go back and fix a lot of like game design flaws from like a ban list perspective. And then now they've kind of probably gotten most of them out. That most of the ban lists are just left to like the actual problems in the current format.
Okay. So I guess overall you think they've got a better handle of their design, and that's why Bandless,
Sure.
I guess,
Yeah.
have. Okay. Um. Well.
One other just a comment on game design and why I think that they got better at it is they used to print cards that weren't once per turn, and now every single card that's new is a hard once per turn, and you're not really going to find new cards that are exceptions to that. And I think it's because they just fundamentally understand what those other cards do.
Yeah, no, I mean, resolving things like Archfiend and Armageddon Knight back in the day multiple times, yeah, it's very different.
Yeah, they don't print cards like that.
Yeah. um, is there anything? You seem like you just seem so super positive and optimistic about the game currently. If you had to pick something, is there any sort of like problem cards or decks or just sort of design angles that you fundamentally don't like or don't agree with that's been occurring recently?
I'm on the border with Appaloosa and how I feel about it from like a game design perspective. It's a bit of a floodgate, so I'm not a huge fan of floodgates in general. I kind of just think the game would be better without them as a whole. And even if they weren't being played, like I would go down the list and ban them all, right? But that being said, Appaloosa is like a border card because it's like I actually don't like cards where you don't have a way to beat them in your engine. Like if you have to draw a card, like Dark Ruler, Droplets, right? To beat a card, I don't like cards like that from a game perspective. But if you can beat it in some kind of way with your engine cards, then I think it's fine from a game design perspective. And I think Appaloosa is like very much on the border of those two things.
Touching upon a little bit more on those like going second cards. I don't know if you've noticed, like, but back in like, previously a good going second card would be like, a dark hole or something, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, like the it's so vastly inflated in how powerful these cards are. I mean, you mentioned Dark Ruler. Yeah, there's evenly matched. There's Dark Ruler. There's Nibiru, which I don't know if you're aware of.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so many of these like high-end like equalizing going second cards now. As someone who's very famed for playing combo, how does that make you feel when there's just so many cards that are designed to just stop you from doing anything?
I mean, to be honest, like I don't want to play a deck that doesn't lose to Nibiru. Like I feel like it's not a good enough deck. You know what I mean? And so then you can kind of like I want a deck that inherently summons more than 5 times in a turn. And if you could build in strategies that like beat it in your combo, that's great. You should do that. But at the end of the day, like I think you still want to just play the cards that are the most powerful.
Yeah. Okay. Why is that? How come you've never been someone who like, okay, I'm just gonna set 4? Like, what is it about that you just don't think has ever been viable?
Monsters are better. I think that monsters are just better than traps as a whole. And so, like, if you're playing the combo deck, you can put more monsters on the board.
Okay.
Like your monsters can turn into free cards. They're floaters, and then they have to spend real trap cards to stop them. And then, if you can keep going, like I feel like the makings of a good deck.
And just because I know you do need to head soon. So you landed on Dragon recently. Was that like a willing choice, or was this just like, oh, here's my friend at Locals, he just passed me a deck that he thought I'd like?
Yeah, no, it seems like the special summon deck. I like it. It's pretty cool. I like Tri Brigades. I wish you could mix them with something. They're like on a border of being like too restrictive to mix them with something and not. But I think they're probably a little bit too restrictive. So I do like them. They feel like a trap deck that's not, doesn't necessarily have to be a trap deck. You know what I mean? And I wish there was a way to like turn them into not a trap deck, but I'm not sure I see it yet. But Dragons just seem like a special summon deck to me.
Okay, that's fair.
No, I don't like the Drytron deck very much.
What? How come you don't like Drytron?
Seems like it plays a lot of bricks.
Okay, fair.
A lot of decks seem like they play a lot of bricks. Like all the Dragoon stuff, that's 3 bricks as far as I'm concerned. You're not going to catch that in my deck, probably.
What is your thoughts on Dragoon?
I understand. It's an interesting dynamic for decks that are not as good. I was talking to my friend Jay, and he was saying that he thinks that it's an interesting dynamic because you can turn any two combo cards, any two non-combo cards into something that outs your board, and it like threatens it at any point in the game. So it's something you always have to be like mindful of. But I don't think it's a particularly great card. Like I wouldn't play it just because you have to play like 3 bricks with it. I consider the Red Eyes Fusion a brick itself too, just because you can't do anything else at the same turn.
Okay. Have you noticed the mass influx of Garnets that we've seen in recent years? I don't know if you missed,
I don't like that. I think that's a mistake.
I don't know if you've noticed, like, if you particularly in 2020, it was very strong with things like O-Lion that were necessary in your deck. Like, you know,
I have a hard rule, 1 max.
Okay, interesting.
I feel like that's a mistake. You're gonna draw almost too many rounds.
Yeah. So
it's okay to draw it a little bit, but like if you just start adding multiple, like you're just gonna draw it all the time.
Okay. Final question, because just because you have to head soon. I did want to ask. So the biggest shift between when you were playing as much as you were to now, I mean, you did mention it was like the hand trap domination sort of thing. But in terms of like the design or just the general play style of the game, how do you what is it that you've enjoyed most as the shift has continued? Like what aspect would you say is the one that you think is like, is just the most exciting to you?
The power curve. Like I said, I love powerful cards. I think the game's best when the cards are the best. So the longer the game goes, the more powerful the cards get. So I think that's pretty interesting.
Don't you think that just has an equilibrium at some point? Like there has to just be like
probably, but I don't think we've hit it yet.
And what happens when we hit it that day?
I think they're gonna probably have to introduce new game mechanics, right? Because like for them, they're balancing like how to keep the game interesting, and if that happens, like I think that's a real risk.
Okay. Well, Mr. Patrick Hoban, thank you so much. It's been a real blast from the past, and it's great to see you doing well and stuff in life, and glad to see you showing some vested interest in the game. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. Good catching up.
All right. Take care. See you later.
Yeah.